Okay, so I'm going to be reviewing the entire Beatles catalogue. I'll be going through all the UK records from Love Me Do right through to the Let It Be album and giving my opinion on them. Now keep in mind, I won't be talking about every single song. Basically, I'll be going through all the albums and talking about what I consider to be the highlights and lowlights of each album, as well as the highlights and lowlights of their career. And I'll also be talking about all their singles, but I won't necessarily be talking about their B-sides. I'll only be talking about their B-sides if I consider them to be highlights of their career. And also, if they happen to feature on an album as well and were sort of on the weaker end of that album, then obviously I'll talk about them as well. So let's get started. So, Love Me Do was their first single, and it was written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And at the time, that was considered a very bold move because most artists at the time were relying on other people to write their songs for them. And the Beatles decided that they were going to rely only on their own songwriting talents. And while that is all very well, it doesn't really amount to much unless the songs they are writing are actually decent songs. And as it turns out, this song is not very good. I mean, it's not bad by any means, but it's just really simple and it's not particularly hard to write a song like this. I mean, musically, it was done very well, but because it was so simple, it didn't allow the Beatles to really show off their talent. So, I guess Please Please Me was the first song that really allowed the Beatles to show the world that they were a force to be reckoned with, and that they were a really talented group, and they definitely showed a lot of talent in that song. As far as songwriting is concerned, I feel that the melody was just a little bit forced at times, but it doesn't really matter too much because the Beatles performed the song so well and they had the spirit, the passion, that audience connection, and just so much joy when they performed it. And these qualities are the foundation of what made the Beatles great in their early years and in their later years as well. Now, their debut album included their first two singles as well as their B-sides and 10 new songs, which included 6 covers and 4 originals. The original songs are all pretty decent. I Saw Standing There was definitely one of the highlights of the album, and while Please Please Me was driven by tight harmonies and emotional delivery, this was a very upbeat, gracious kind of song, and it was full of so much joy and spirit, as well as a brilliant guitar solo from George Harrison. Misery and There's a Place are also very good, and Do You Want to Know a Secret? Not quite as good, but the fact that they were able to come up with this many decent songs after only having something as good as Love Me Do 6 months earlier shows a definite improvement in their songwriting. Their covers are all pretty good. However, Boys, it was a great performance, but I said this with Love Me Do, and I'll say it with this song. It's not very hard to write a song like this. So why on earth would you do a cover of a song that you could easily write yourself? Why don't they just write down their own very simple lyrics to the standard 12-bar blues that we've heard on thousands of other songs and kept the arrangement the same and recorded that? It would have been just as good, except at least they would have went to the effort to actually write their own material. Also, A Taste of Honey, just the vocals on that song just didn't quite work for me. I don't know exactly what it is. It wasn't exactly cheesy, but I don't know, maybe it was a bit oversung, something like that. Anyway, other than that, Chains was good, Baby It's You, and Nana Go To Him were both excellent, and Twist and Shout was just brilliant. I mean, that song was recorded after having already performed 9 other new songs. The 9 other new songs were recorded in the same day, and Twist and Shout was the last one they did, and John Lennon's voice was pretty much blown at that point. So the Beatles had to give it everything they had in a single take. And while it may not be the most technically perfect performance of their career, it's the energy and the passion that they gave to that performance that makes it one of the highlights of their early years. In fact, to an extent, the same goes for the entire album. Because the Beatles didn't have much time to make these songs perfect for a studio recording, the Beatles had to focus on the emotion and the passion and the spirit. And because the Beatles were predominantly a live act at the time, they really brought that feel to these songs. Overall, I would say the album, it's not their best work, but it built such a strong foundation for them to build on. And on just that foundation alone, and judging just on how well an album builds a foundation for them to build on and develop, this is about as good as debut albums get. Because that emotion and passion that they brought to these songs was so crucial to their entire career as musicians. Now, their next single, From Me to You, felt somewhat of a rehash of their previous single. I'm only really saying that because the Beatles were so good at not rehashing anything. Whenever they created a new song, they always tried to give it a new quality that none of their previous songs had. But when they made this song, they really tried to go back to the same roots of what made Please Please Me great, which is great, and I think that's very good, and I think they succeeded in that very well. But A, it doesn't offer any new qualities that Please Please Me didn't have, and B, it doesn't improve on any of these qualities. Again, that doesn't make this song bad, it just doesn't meet the Beatles' typical standards, which, after all, are extremely high. Also, like Please Please Me, the melody is still slightly forced at times, but I actually think this is an improvement on Please Please Me in terms of melody. In terms of everything else, this song pretty much has the same qualities that Please Please Me had. However, because it doesn't offer any new qualities that Please Please Me didn't have, and because it doesn't improve on any of these qualities, it's not as significant as Please Please Me, and therefore Please Please Me is sort of better by default, if you know what I mean. She Loves You is also driven by those same qualities that made Please Please Me and From Me to You great, but unlike From Me to You, this song actually improves upon those qualities. Firstly, it has a much stronger and far more natural melody, and secondly, the Beatles had this energy to them when they recorded this song that they sort of had on their previous singles, but not to the same extent. Now, their second album had the same proportion of originals and covers as their previous album, but unlike their previous album, none of their previously released singles were included on this album, which was the Beatles' general policy at the time. The originals are a mixed bag. There are definitely some filler tracks in there like Don't Bother Me, Little Child, and I Wanna Be a Man, but at their best, these originals are really excellent and displayed further growth in their songwriting. It Won't Be Long was a very good song, although I think those unique chord changes during the yeah yeah bit a little unnecessary and a little bit forced, but it doesn't take up too much of the song, so it's not too bad. All I've got to do was definitely a big step forward for John Lennon as a songwriter as well as a singer. it's where we really start to see the Beatles becoming really diverse songwriters, which is something that would blossom on their next album. All My Loving is, I think that song is on the same level as She Loves You, I Saw Standing There, A Hard Day's Night, and yet people always rank this song about a level below, and I don't quite get that. I understand that it wasn't released as a single, but nor was I Saw Standing There. Although I Saw Standing There was probably the highlight of Please Please Me, but I guess All My Loving is sort of as well. I don't know, I think the best explanation for this song being underrated is the fact that it wasn't as much of a milestone for the group as, say, She Loves You was, and it was released around the same time as I Wanna Hold Your Hand, which pretty much had all the qualities that All My Loving had, only more. And so this song kind of fell under that song's shadow, if you know what I mean. This song may not have had as much of those signature harmonies that drove Pleased With Me and She Loves You, but it had just as much emotion and spirit. It may not attempt to connect with their audience as much as She Loves You, but it's just as much a joy to listen to. So yeah, the originals were definitely a mixed bag, but the covers were all really excellent, certainly better than the covers from their previous album, besides Twist and Shout. Firstly, none of these songs were throwaway tracks like Boys. Secondly, these songs provide the Beatles with an opportunity to show their musical talent and versatility in ways that most of their original songs couldn't. And thirdly, some of these songs were by legends like Smokey Robinson and Chuck Berry instead of more obscure artists like the Shirelles and Arthur Alexander. And the way they performed these songs like they owned them and delivered performances that were somewhat comparable with the originals is the sign of a great band. 3 of these covers were from Motown artists, and all of them contain some of their best vocal performances to date. Also, Roll Over Beethoven was probably the biggest rock on this album, and it's not quite on the same level as I Saw Standing There and Twist and Shout, but it's still very good. When I first heard this album, I found this to contain the earliest recordings where their vocals really impressed me. While Please Please Me is such a joy to listen to, it doesn't contain that much wow factor. I mean, I wasn't there at the time it was released, so I don't know exactly how I would have reacted if I was there at the time, but I found that despite some great vocal performances on songs like Please Please Me, Anna Go To Him, and Baby It's You, I found the vocals on these songs to contain a certain magic to them that the songs on Please Please Me lacked. Although at the same time, there is a certain spirit on Please Please Me that we don't really get on this album. Nevertheless, With the Beatles shows more diversity than Please Please Me and has more highlights. So this was definitely a big step forward for the group, and it's definitely not a rehash of their previous album, which is a very good thing. But it also has a little more filler. Is it better than Please Please Me? I don't know, I think it's a very close call. Both were key milestones for the group, and both offered something really fresh. If I had to choose, I may be leaning slightly towards With the Beatles, but it's a very close call. I Wanna Hold Your Hand is where they fully blossomed as songwriters. This song had everything their previous singles did, but their melodies were far stronger than ever before. This is the first song in their catalogue that can be considered one of their very best songs. But even better is that despite the success of this song, they never tried to rehash it again. While many of the songs on A Hard Day's Night are still driven by those same qualities that made I Wanna Hold Your Hand so great, they all have qualities that make them really stand out, whether it's the opening chord of A Hard Day's Night or the falsetto in Tell Me Why. And it's worth noting that the first single they released after I Wanna Hold Your Hand contains no harmonies whatsoever and has a feel to it that's completely different to their previous three singles. And while it may not be quite as good as I Wanna Hold Your Hand, it doesn't really matter because the Beatles make up for songs not being quite as good as others with diversity. A Hard Day's Night did the same for their songwriting that With the Beatles did for their musicianship. While With the Beatles allowed the Beatles to display improved musical abilities and increased versatility, A Hard Day's Night showed diversity in their songwriting and proved that I Wanna Hold Your Hand was not a fluke and that they had really blossomed as songwriters. A Hard Day's Night is often known for being their first album with no covers. However, this has a lot to do with the fact that none of the singles from 1963 were included on With the Beatles, while the two singles they released from the Hard Day's Night sessions were included on the album. If they didn't include these singles, they probably would have filled the album with the songs from the Long Tall Sally EP, meaning the album would have looked something like this. While this album still only has 3 covers, these covers are not quite as good and significant as the songs on With the Beatles, but the originals are far more consistent and more diverse than the original on With the Beatles. So that, I think, is where this album was a step forward for the group. This album has a lot of highlights. It has some great up-tempo songs like A Hard Day's Night, I Should Have Known Better, You Can't Do That, Anytime at All, and some brilliant ballads like If I Fell and I Love Her, and songs like Things We Said Today, which have a very unique feel to them that are not quite like any other songs in their catalogue. This was clearly their best album to date. It established John Lennon and Paul McCartney as a killer songwriting team, and it represents the peak of that early stage of their career. So that concludes part 1 of my review. Part 2 will hopefully be up in about a week, so see you then.